Hello and welcome to Midweek Peek, a peek behind the scenes at Old South Church in Boston. My name is Nancy Taylor, I am your host, and in today's edition, I will make the case that Massachusetts General Hospital and Old South Church in Boston share some DNA. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. This is Nancy Taylor with a program today about Massachusetts General Hospital and Old South Church in Boston. Just a few things about Mass General. It is the third oldest general hospital in the United States after Pennsylvania and New York. It is currently ranked as number 2, as the second best hospital in the United States. When MGH was founded in 1811, wealthy people who became ill were cared for at home, and general hospitals were intended for the poor. MGH was the brainchild of the Reverend John Bartlett, chaplain of the Boston Almshouse. Bartlett had visited general hospitals, the one in Philadelphia and the one in New York, and upon his return to Boston, organized a meeting of wealthy benefactors and prominent physicians. The rest is history. MGH can boast a lot of firsts: the first use of ether, first limb transplant. It's also the first American hospital to bring social workers onto its staff, which I think is something of the ethos of this amazing hospital. I said at the outset that MGH and Old South Church share some DNA, and I'll get to that in a minute, but first an introduction. I'm joined today by Deb Washington. She's in her office at MGH, RN and PhD. Deb is the Director of Diversity for Nursing and Patient Care Services at Mass General Hospital, where she has been for 35 years. You can see some of her associations that are listed there on the screen. And I also want to note that she is the immediate past moderator of Old South Church, co-founder of our gospel choir, and co-founder of Grace Speaks, Old South Church's Conversations on Race. In addition, I'm going to show you some of her awards and recognitions. It's a longer list, but here are a number of them, including having been named in 2018 one of the 100 most influential people of color in Boston. That's a big deal, Deb Washington. But Deb, I have some questions for you. You've been working at MGH for 35 years, or more than 35 years. How is this coronavirus affecting life at MGH now? What does it feel like on the inside?
Well, it's an interesting question, Nancy, because we are speaking at the end of April, and I'm going to answer that question differently than I would have even a week ago. Coming in this morning, security was not manning the tables where we sign in and attest to our health. That responsibility this morning has been given over to staff. We're still wearing masks when we enter the corridors, and we're still doing hand sanitizing. But the hustle and bustle that defines what it is to be working in this place at this time is not back to what it once was, and what would not have surprised people in terms of noise level and activity and all of that. But it no longer is like a Sunday morning calm either. There is much more laughter than a few weeks ago. You can hear conversation between people while we stand behind our 6-meter distance. So where a few weeks ago it felt cautious and quiet and maybe even a little fearful, today there seems to be a lifting of spirit. So I'm seeing improvement in that way, and I hope the public is feeling exactly the same way.
Interesting, because at this very, very moment, we are still in the surge in Massachusetts. But I do think people have a sense that being there was arriving at something important, and it means we can get past it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Are you here to tell me there's a light at the end of this tunnel?
I am here to tell you there's a light at the end of this very long tunnel that people have been going through. So whatever we've been doing is working, so let's stick to it.
Okay. Mass General has paid attention since its very founding to the most vulnerable. Um, and how is that playing out right now during this coronavirus crisis?
Well, the coronavirus crisis is a story in and of itself that is exposing what the life of the vulnerable has been for a very long time. And what people are beginning to realize through their charitable contributions, and now that the top has been ripped off anecdotal stories and there is now data to support what vulnerability means for people in terms of not having access to food, what it means to live from paycheck to paycheck. Mass General is paying attention to that in terms of the kinds of services it is providing. And I mean, it's beyond the clinical. It is about the lived experience of what it means to be ill and vulnerable.
Well, we're so grateful for Mass General and for all those people there working so hard on behalf of everybody. Deb, as a person working in the heart of this, of a hotspot, of the coronavirus hotspot, what is your level of anxiety and how do you manage it?
I'm once again a little less anxious than I would have been a week or two ago. I am the kind of person who does well when I have information, when I have facts, and when I have a trustworthy source to listen to those facts, so that I know what it is appropriate for me to do, not only in terms of caring for myself and being responsible, but to think about my neighbor. And the Bible describes it as taking care of the widow and the orphan when it talks about the vulnerable. And in this hospital, we have a truism that we pay attention to. And that truism is when my neighbor is in distress, everyone is my neighbor.
Mm. Wow, nice, nice. I have heard you say, this is so intrigued me. I've heard you say that if MGH were a church, it would be Old South Church. What do you mean by that? What do Old South Church and Mass General have in common?
That they're values led. When I served in a leadership position at Old South and in my leadership position here at Mass General, I am intrigued by the way both organizations problem solve. They're very practical. They are very much aware of the real world, but when it comes down to the case of making a decision, values and morals always went out. And I like that. It reflects the idea that each organization has a very strong sense of identity. We have stories to tell that go back a long way. So we have heroes to emulate, and in those stories, we see ourselves as being involved in the larger landscape, the larger picture of what's going on in the world.
I think about, founding stories, stories of Genesis are so important. And to know that Mass General was founded to take care of the poorest of the poor in their time of need, and that that's still a part of the legacy going forward. I also said that I was going to say that, share that Old South Church and Mass General Hospital share some DNA, and we do, in the person of William Phillips Jr., who was born in 1750, lived to 1827. He was an Old South Church member for 53 years, a deacon of this church for 33 years. Like Deb Washington, he served as moderator of Old South Church. He was also our treasurer for a while. He served on a minister's search committee, as Deb Washington has, and he was the 10th Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, serving from 1812 to 1823. But my point here is that he was the first president of Massachusetts General Hospital, serving from 1813 to 1816. Moreover, the Phillips Society, still very much alive and well at Mass General Hospital, which is their legacy giving program equal to our Mary Norton Society, the Phillips Society is named for our William Phillips Jr. And the reason is that he was the first person to name Massachusetts General Hospital in his will. His bequest supported the construction of the Bullfinch Building, the hospital's original patient care facility, now a national landmark, and the symbolic heart of Massachusetts General Hospital. So MGH and Old South Church in Boston share some DNA, not only in the person of William Phillips, but also Deb Washington and other members of our church who have served at that hospital over the years. Our shared DNA is rooted in shared people, shared leaders, and in shared values. The values of generosity, compassion, kindness, and concrete assistance. Assistance based on science, on evidence, on reason, and quite simply also on human need. And this should be no surprise. Jesus was a healer. Old South Church's first minister, Thomas Thatcher, was both a medical doctor and a clergy person. In 1676, during the outbreak of the measles and smallpox, Thomas Thatcher printed and had distributed for free the first medical tract on this soil. So thank you, Dr. Washington, for your time. Thank you for entering the belly of the beast every day and helping to care for the most vulnerable. Thanks to all our hardworking first responders and essential workers. That's today's edition of Midweek Peek, a peek behind the scenes at Old South Church in Boston. Be well, be safe, stay home.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Signing out.